Hey, it's John and Mike, brew-news.com, and tonight, it doesn't matter, you're watching it some point in the day, and we're talking about hops. We did a video a couple weeks ago translating grain bills in recipes in a proper way that's easy for someone else on the other side of the world, or even across the table, to take what you've written and then brew it on their own system. We talked about malts and how to best calculate them. And then we talked a little bit about hops, but we said that that's a completely separate video. Well, guess what? Welcome to that video.
You arrived.
We're talking about how you can express the amount of hops you're using in your homebrew recipes, and the best way to, putting that either online or, writing a letter to your friend, or however you want to do it. How do you best signify how much hops you're using in your homebrew recipe that somebody else on a completely different homebrewing system can brew and get the same results that you're getting?
Yep.
And so I know that we've talked a lot about it, and it's actually in this issue of Brew Your Own magazine,
yes,
talking about Mr. Michael Tosmeyer talking about it. So let's talk a little bit about how hops were sort of like the international bittering units, and how can one calculate that,
right?
And what should we really be doing, Mr. Mike?
Who knows? Who knows? This is going to be mostly opinion peppered with a little bit of fact.
Right? that's the best kind of video.
Exactly. So, in short, I think that the definition of an IBU, or the purpose of an IBU measurement, is to try to create some sort of value that you can attach bitterness to. An IBU, in theory, is actually 1 part per million of isomerized alpha acid unit.
Okay.
But this article that's in BYO recently actually discusses how a lot of the formulas used to calculate IBUs when you're doing recipe formulation, whether you're using software or an online calculator, those are all formulas based on data, based on attempts to bitter and quantify bittering.
Yeah.
But as craft brewing has evolved, a lot of those formulas, while they generate numbers, they're just models. They're just mathematical models, and most of them are actually they're wrong. But there's a famous computational saying by some guy that says all models are wrong, but some are useful. And in this example, your formula like Rager, Tinseth, Daniels, all those formulas, they're all useful as long as you stick to using one all the time.
Okay.
So if you brew a beer that is 40 IBUs, according to whatever formula you're using, and you drink it and go, oh, I wish this was a little more bitter,
yes,
then you say to yourself, oh, maybe I'll bump it up by another 10 IBUs. So you go into your formula and you add ounces of hops, add a certain alpha acid unit until you get to 50 IBUs, and you brew it again and taste it, right? So that works as long as you stick with a single formula. But what's interesting is the reason why we really talk about IBUs is because back in the late 90s, early 2000s,
there was
the IPA IBU arms race was on, right?
Yeah.
And it was, let's get to 100 IBUs,
right,
200 IBUs, 300 IBUs. Now, we're not going to debate what the threshold is, what the solubility limits are, and all that stuff. But the reality is, that was fine when we were talking about making beer more and more and more bitter.
Yes.
But the current IPA craze really has nothing to do with bitterness.
No,
right?
It's about hoppiness.
I mean, I know if you're on the West Coast, you still maybe enjoy a good Stone IPA or a Pliny the Elder, but New England IPAs are really focusing on fruity flavors, aromas, and that end of brewing, and we all know how we get there, so we don't need to discuss that. But IBUs don't really capture that. And so another way to maybe discuss it, which actually Charlie Papazian in The Complete Joy of Home Brewing used to discuss hop additions as just simply alpha acid units or homebrew units, I think he actually called it.
Yeah.
And all that really was what's your percent alpha acid times the amount that you're adding, and report the time you're adding it. So I kind of like the idea of getting away from the IBU and just thinking about reporting alpha acid units. So if I told you I put in 50 alpha acid units, dry hop, of whatever hop, you could very quickly say, okay, well, I've got these Centennial hops too, and they're a certain percentage, and he did 50 units, so you just calculate it. And the calculation I'm talking about is if you had 8% alpha acids and you added 1 ounce of hops, that would be 8 alpha acid units.
And if you added 2, it'd be 16.
So it's pretty simple. And that transcends batch size. And if you're trying to replicate a recipe I have, it also transcends gravity measurements, right? Because if you're trying to make the beer that I'm discussing this calculation in, you're going to shoot for the same gravity. So the problem with all those calculations, those calculators and stuff for IBUs, is that they take into account time, temperature, gravity, and it's just a multi-variate equation, which is hard to replicate on paper, certainly. But they're all sort of making assumptions about where the business is going. So I think if we're talking about hoppy beers today, or even beers that only have 1 hop addition, it's very simple, straightforward to talk about this stuff as just how much alpha acid did you add to your beer, and when did you add it?
And when did you add it in the boil? Yep.
Yeah, so, I mean, I had this debate with a lot of people. A lot of people, we're all still clinging to IBUs, and we like the ideas of IBUs, but to talk about IBUs in like a New England IPA is just absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, right? It's like I might as well talk about gravity in the form of like, I don't know, some sort of archaic measurement of stones or something, right? It just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And I feel you. And I think that, so when it comes down to just recipes, it really is more of like, I have this variety of hops. It had this many alpha acid percent, like an alpha acid percentage of this, which then I would translate to alpha acid unit.
Right.
And then I added it this time in the boil.
Because and I know another thing that it normalizes for is I know a lot of times if I am using Beersmith and I calculate a recipe, just like, oh, I think I'd like to put a recipe together, and let's say I'm using Cascade hops at 5% alpha acid units, and I calculate how many grams I need or how many ounces I need to get to a certain level in the recipe. But then I go to the store and I find Cascade hops and I buy them, but then I've come home and I've brewed beer only to have it sort of disappoint me in the hop levels, realizing that's because my recipe was at 5% and these guys are at 4.5% or 7%.
Yeah.
And so if you were really thinking about alpha acid unit, you would just buy more hop or use less hop.
Agreed.
Right?
Yep. So that's it.
That's
it's all
it.
about alpha acid units and what time in the boil, and that's all you need to do to translate for your recipe.
So we've kind of spared everybody some complex mathematics, and because I don't want to deal with mathematics of IBU calculations.
You don't want your multifactorial calculations.
We're not there yet. We're not hitting the whiteboard yet.
Not yet. We're going to erase all that stuff.
Yeah.
So if you like what you see, check out the BYO issue for March, April 2018. There is, under the Advanced Brewing header, a headline, IBUs, modern beers with old formulas. Don't be fooled by calculated values. So
and his name is Mike too.
And there you go. And somebody actually wrote to us last week saying Mike's are the best. And I wrote back like, Mike's are just okay.
Yeah, just okay. All right.
Anyway, he'll take it. But check out that article too. He basically is talking about the same thing we're talking about here. So.
And if BYO would like to sponsor these videos,
they already have done a lot for us.
Yes, absolutely.
Kind of thing. So, anyway, if you like this video, please give us the old little thumbs up. Subscribe. We do this every week. And please comment below if you have some thoughts about how to best calculate how many hops should I put into my homebrew. I would love to hear from you in the comments below.
Tell us how tightly you're holding on to that IBU formula.
Yeah.
Just not going to let it go.
I know. I think I still put it as a, along with original gravity and final gravity, IBUs is also there as a calculation. And people want to see ABV as well.
Yep.
It's all these things that, we still put out there as homebrewers because it's hard to let go. It is. All right, for John and Mike, brew-dudes.com, brew on.
Cheers.